Market surveys are a great tool to learn how competitive your organization is with respect to pay and to determine how much to pay different types of jobs, different job families in the future. So, a market survey is part of what is more broadly called a market review. And both of these are used to help maintain and ensure what is called external equity, or sometimes referred to as external competitiveness. Now, the goal of external equity is to really look outward from your organization to the competitive environment, looking at other organizations, and trying to determine how you can pay your own workers in given jobs to try to attract, motivate, and retain talented individuals for those jobs. Now, there's different market strategies that we might apply, and market surveys and market reviews help us determine how we're doing in terms of paying internally within our company relative to the external environment and how other organizations in our organization are paying the same or similar jobs that we have. So there's generally three different strategies that an organization might take, and specifically these are called market strategies. One, they may choose to lead the market. Two, they may choose to match the market. Or three, they may choose to lag the market. Now, leading the market means in general that an organization has decided for a particular job that they're going to pay more than the median or the mean pay rate of competitors for a particular job. Matching the market means that you're simply going to probably pay somewhere at the median or mean in terms of how much your competitors are paying for that same job. And then lagging the market means that you're going to pay less than that. Now, most organizations will take what's called a mixed market approach, meaning that for certain key jobs, which are sometimes referred to as benchmark jobs, for certain key jobs, they will decide to lead the market, others they'll decide to match the market, and finally others they might decide to lag the market. And a lot of this plays into labor economics of supply and demand and determining which jobs, which areas have a surplus in talent available and which have a shortage available, and how do you attract people. And one of the ways that we can do that is by paying people an appropriate amount. Now, again, the mixed market approach is going to be one that most organizations take, and this should be in line with the organization's strategic objectives. Now, in terms of what a market review is, a market review has been defined as the process of collecting pay data for benchmark jobs from other organizations, which is defined by Bauer and colleagues from their 2019 textbook. Now, a market survey is one tool we can use during the market review process to determine how much other organizations are paying their certain benchmark jobs, some of which we might use in our own organization. Now, a market survey, which is sometimes called a salary survey, is a survey that's used to collect pay data on benchmark jobs, which are, again, sometimes called key jobs. And these are often conducted by a third-party vendor or some kind of government agency. Now, generally, you can break these down into three different categories of market surveys. You could use what is often referred to as a traditional survey, and these are ones that are often carried out by government agencies. Now, Career One Stop, or more specifically careeronestop.com, is something that's generated by the US government, and this is a great place to start. They are building this out more, and you can drill down to the state level and so forth for higher levels of specificity. Now, this also maps onto most, if not all, jobs on onetonline.org, where the occupational network is a great place to find information about jobs in terms of the knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics, as well as the tasks, duties, and responsibilities, or in other words, job analysis information for fairly common benchmark jobs. Now, in addition, some organizations will use what are called customized surveys. So meaning they might belong or subscribe to a consortium of organizations all from the same industry, and they will provide their data confidentially to a third-party vendor, and then they'll request certain drill down information or segmentation information with their survey. So for instance, if you're working in a hospital or you are a healthcare organization with hospitals, you may wish to be a part of a customized survey in which you can get specialized information and more specific information on the size of hospital in terms of the number of beds and how much they're paying, whether the hospital's in an urban or rural or suburban area, and other details like that. Now, a third type of market survey is going to be conducted on a web-based platform, and these can actually overlap with the traditional and customized surveys as well. And so these web-based platforms or surveys include things like Salary Expert, Salary.com, and really commonly today, Payscale.com too. So there's a number of different sources that organizations can use, and these are all tools that are available to help conduct a market review and understand how well we're paying people in our organization for benchmark jobs relative to other organizations. Now, in terms of how a market review process unfolds, you could generally break it down into 4 different steps. The first one is choosing 2 or more market survey sources. The second one is matching job descriptions. The third one is aging survey data. And then fourth and finally, applying survey weights. So let's dive into each one of these in a little bit more detail. So for that first step, the recommendation is generally to choose at least 2 market survey sources, if not 3 or more. Now, why do we choose 2 or more? Well, every market survey suffers from sampling and measurement error. This is just a part, not just of market surveys, but any type of data acquisition or specifically regarding surveys is always going to suffer from both of these things. So the goal is to minimize this as much as possible. One of the easiest ways to improve or rather to reduce sampling error is to get bigger and bigger, more representative samples. And so some market survey sources or vendors will use more sophisticated and rigorous sampling methodologies and collect the data with greater accuracy. Now, another thing is to consider is that some market surveys are going to provide more breadth in terms of the number of benchmark jobs that they cover, and some are going to provide more depth, meaning that they're going to have more detailed information about the organizations that participated in this survey. Again, using that example of the number of hospital beds, if you're a hospital or in the healthcare industry, or whether it's located in urban, suburban, or rural areas, and maybe generally the number of employees that work for that organization as an indicator of the size of that organization as well. But in general, you want to choose 2 or more market survey sources. And finally, in the fourth and final step, I'll tell you how you can actually combine the data from those market survey sources. Now, the second step is to match job descriptions, a process that's more of an art than a science in many cases, and I'll show you an example in a moment. But what we mean by matching job descriptions is first, you identify your set of benchmark jobs. These are those key jobs that are likely common across organizations in your industry or in general. So for instance, in the healthcare industry, this might be a benchmark job would be a registered nurse or a nurse practitioner or a nurse anesthetist, things like that are common across different hospitals and healthcare settings. Now, as an initial step, you'll want to look through the market survey source and the data that they provide and search by job title. Now, this is a great place to start. Now, but the issue with searching with job titles is that different organizations might use different job titles. And another issue is that sometimes you might find the same job title, but actually the job is described or defined in a different way in the survey than it would be in your own organization. And perhaps there's a different job with a different job title that actually has a job description that's going to be more closely able to be mapped on to the benchmark job that you're focusing on. So generally, you can start searching by job title, but I would highly recommend that you make any final matching decision based on the job descriptions and not the titles. Now, even if the job titles are different, focus on the job descriptions themselves. And I'll show you an example here now of these are actually from careeronestop.com. That's that government source, as well as salary.com here. And so here we have the job titles at the top. And so you'll see the job titles where we have the licensed practical and licensed vocational nurses is what careeronestop.com calls it. And perhaps your organization just calls it a licensed practical nurse or an LPN. Well, so that's what salary.com calls it. So you can see already that for the benchmark job of a licensed practical nurse that we have 2 different job titles that we found in 2 different market survey sources here in careeronestop.com and salary.com. Now, you can also see that the job descriptions for each are of different lengths. You see that here we just have a 2-sentence, relatively short job description for careeronestop.com, and that is to care for ill, injured, convalescing patients or persons with disabilities in hospitals, nursing homes, clinics, and private homes, group homes, and similar institutions, may work under the supervision of a registered nurse. And then the final sentence, licensing required. And as you can see over here for salary.com's job description, it's much more lengthy in nature. Now, more than likely, the job description you have for your organization, let's say for your licensed practical nurse, is going to have even more detail than this in terms of the tasks, duties, and responsibilities, the summary of that job, as well as perhaps information about the knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics, which would really fall more under the job specifications. Now, the art comes into how do you pick appropriate ones and how do you map them on? Again, focus on the job description more so than the title is the recommendation. Now, the third step in a market review is to do what we call age the survey data. Now, what this means is that market survey data is going to be collected at different times by different vendors or sources. And for that reason, we want to bring them up to a common point in time. And in addition to that, often we want to project into the future and we want to estimate the market pay rate of a benchmark job at some point in the future, whether that's 1 month in the future or a year in the future or somewhere in between. And thus we need to age the survey data to make it more up to date and consistent across these different market survey sources. Now, this requires determining the annual market movement rate, which for example might be 3.1%. And this is going to be based on some type of budget growth projection that you can find from different sources, such as World at Work. Now, ultimately, we're going to use this information both in terms of what the market movement rate is, as well as the number of months that we need to age the data, or even perhaps years. And we're going to use that information to calculate what's called an aging factor. And then we can multiply the aging factor for each survey source and times its market pay rates that we've identified in order to age the data into the future. Now, in most cases, you're going to have a different aging factor for different market survey sources, again, because these different market survey sources collected the data at different times. Now, the fourth step in a market review is to apply survey weights. Sometimes this is called weighting your market survey data. And this is based on the idea that different market surveys are based on different sample sizes, whether that's in terms of the number of organizations or the number of employees within those organizations. So again, the idea is that that sampling error is decreased in general when we have a more representative sample, and one way to get a more representative sample is to have a larger sample. And so part of the logic is here, if you decide to use a sample weighted average, or in other words, a sample weighted mean of some kind, is that you are going to give more credit essentially, or weight those surveys that surveyed more people and or more organizations because they probably have more representative data. And also, in other instances, you might look at the actual methodology employed by different market surveys, because some might use more rigorous approaches, and you might come up with a more holistic judgment in terms of how much you're going to weight one survey versus the other. Again, though, commonly we'll apply some kind of technique like calculating a sample weighted average or mean. Sometimes this is just referred to as a weighted mean or a weighted average, and we use this to weight the survey data to come up with essentially a composite market pay rate for a given benchmark job based on 2 or more market surveys. So when we're trying to combine those, instead of taking just a simple arithmetic mean, often we'll use a weighted mean or weighted average approach to hopefully favor those surveys that actually had more data available to them and or had a more rigorous methodology that they employed. Now, finally, as I mentioned in the beginning, the goal here is in part to ensure external equity, which is also called external competitiveness. We want to pay people at an appropriate rate for our key benchmark jobs to make sure that we can attract, motivate, and retain talented individuals in those jobs. Now, if an organization decides to solely base its pay practices for certain jobs off the external market, this is typically referred to as a market pricing strategy. So specifically, this is when an organization bases its pay levels and its pay structure directly on its competitors' pay levels and pay structures. And so, again, this is something that an organization might choose to do in a market that is very competitive for gaining talent from, or acquiring talent and retaining talent for certain types of skills that apply to certain types of benchmark jobs. Now, there are other approaches that many organizations will use in which they actually integrate internal information about their job structure with information about the external market in terms of market pay rates. And they try to come up with something, a strategy in terms of paying employees and ultimately a pay structure that's going to be both internally equitable as well as externally equitable. So this wraps up the lecture on market surveys.